welcome to the channel The Thinking Brain Club. This is the channel about brain and mental health. Welcome to the club and thank you for watching us. Today we are starting a very important and intriguing series of episodes about dementia. And our guest is Professor, Dr. Psychiatrist and Neurologist, Dr. Perminder Sachdev. Sachdev. Sachdev, yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Perminder, for joining us today. This is our first of the series of podcasts or YouTube videos we're trying to sort of organize to help people understand better some of the conditions which are at the interface between neurology and psychiatry. It's a great way to start with dementia. So we feel honored to have you on board. I know a lot about you, and I was just doing a bit of a Googling and realized you have got your own Wikipedia page as well. So I'm sure I will be spending hours and hours describing your portfolio, describing about your achievements. My understanding.
Your biography could be the topic of an episode already, Perminder. And I have the first question that is not directly connected to dementia, but I think it would be very interesting for many people to know why did you choose Maori tradition during your training, during your study? When you only studied as a psychiatrist, could you please tell how did Maori tradition help a young psychiatrist?
Yeah, so firstly, I want to thank you for inviting me to your podcast and actually for starting your podcast with my interview. It's a great pleasure to be part of this podcast. As you know, I'm a neuropsychiatrist. I'm a CNTA professor of neuropsychiatry at the University of New South Wales, and I'm also co-director of the Center for Healthy Brain Aging at the University of New South Wales. I also had a clinical unit called the Neuropsychiatric Institute at the Prince of Wales Hospital, also in Sydney. And I've been working here for over 3 decades now. Now, that's a good question you ask about Maori ethnopsychiatry. In fact, I started my training in India, in New Delhi, at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And after I finished my MBBS, I straight away went into psychiatry training and did my MD in psychiatry. That's a 3-year course at AIMS. And soon after that, I applied for various jobs around the world, and I took up a job in New Zealand, in Auckland. Mm-hmm. And I continued my training there. I was a registrar in Auckland. And of course, that was my first exposure to the West. I'd never left India before. I've never been overseas at all before that. And the contrast in cultures struck me. Of course, that's one thing that you really do find when you come to a new country, which is quite different. And in those days, actually, this is of course much before the internet or social media. So we were not exposed to the West very much when we were in India. The information was very limited. And I became very interested in transcultural aspects of psychiatry as part of the period of training. Of course, this was all done after hours, because during the day I was a trainee registrar. I was working in the hospital, seeing mentally ill people. But after hours, I would start looking around for cultural expression of psychiatry. And of course, as you know, in Maori, about 15% of the population in New Zealand, also called Aotearoa, about 15% of the population is Maori. And they have a very robust culture with very long traditions. In fact, they were there much before Europeans arrived in Aotearoa. And many aspects of their culture influence their psychiatric presentations. I wanted to see how cultural aspects of Maori sort of background in anthropology and culture influenced their presentation in psychiatry. And in particular, I was interested in a few ethnopsychological concepts. One of them is mana tapu noa, which is a triumvirate.
What does it mean? It's very interesting.
In fact, if the word taboo in English comes from the word tapu in Polynesian languages. And so there is actually a very good division between secular power and religious power, spiritual power in Maori culture. And mana is that secular power, and tapu is embodies the spiritual power. And noa is actually the state without tapu, the non-spiritual state. So, and there's quite a balance between these various powers, and it actually helps structure society and influences Maori behavior quite a lot, even to this day. And there was another concept called hakama, which loosely translates to shame in other cultures, although it's not exactly the same. And that can also translate. So we could see some patients who had done something which had brought them shame within their community. And they were thought to be pakama, and they would have certain behaviors. So I've studied that concept of pakama. And then also looked at how a Maori elder interacted, because we used to have a Maori elder who would come in to see psychiatric patients and have long sessions with them. So I sat in many of those sessions and looked at the way they interacted and used that as a paradigm for psychotherapy in a Maori elder relationship. So those are the things that I did, and I wrote that up for my PhD, in fact, later. But somehow I found that, transcultural psychiatry is interesting, but it took me a bit away from neuroscience, and I was very interested in neuroscience and the brain. So I thought, okay, I had to drift back to neuroscience, and that's why I went into neuropsychiatry. And I got an opportunity to work in neuropsychiatry at the Prince Henry Hospital in Sydney. That was the only neuropsychiatric unit in Sydney, and one of two in Australia at that time. And I've been there ever since, in fact, and that's really the one that I've developed as a neuropsychiatric institute. And of course, the Center for Healthy Brain Aging developed later in 2012, and that was focus on dementia and aging.
Thank you very much. But I think that time also scientific community didn't consider seriously such topic as spirit, as mind, as consciousness. It was something transcendental, and it wasn't took seriously. Whereas now we have a new wave of research, and this is a very hot topics: what consciousness is, what free will is, what spirit is, and that could be a new branch of research looking into these ancient traditions and how people interpret.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been interest in the spiritual side of things. Of course, the question is, can neuroscience study spirituality? Neuroscience can study the mind and mental phenomena, and that's really, I think, is the quest. In fact, the neuropsychiatry, very much the quest is that you're looking at the neuroscientific basis of mental phenomena, because we
can also speculate about consciousness.
Consciousness is much more difficult. I think, of course, many neuroscientists have looked at consciousness as well and come up with certain hypotheses. But still, I think there is something ephemeral about consciousness, something that, because neuroscience, most of the practices in neuroscience are to some extent reductionistic. So you have to pour into the brain, you have to look at the molecular functioning of the brain and the network functioning of the brain. And as soon as you start doing that, you lose out on the mental phenomena, the complex mental phenomena, which are at a higher level. Even though we think that they emanate from the functioning of the brain, there is a neural substrate to the mental phenomena.
Of consequence, do you think that this is, what would you prefer to think, that the mental phenomena is the substrate of all neurological processes, or it is a consequence of them?
I think mostly people look at it that way, that basically the basis is neural mechanism. And from that, from the complexity of those neural phenomena, the mind emanates. But I think we should also understand that to some extent it is a two-way process.
Yes.
That because external stimuli, input from not only from the outside, but also from the body, is influencing, this input is influencing mental phenomena. And mental input is influencing the neuro working as well. So there is a top-down effect as well. But largely when we actually try to study mental phenomena, we are looking at a bottom-up approach. So you look at the neural substrates and then try to explain mental phenomena on the basis of those neural substrates. But still, there is a gap that is very hard to, because one has to make a leap in terms of trying to understand neural phenomena to mental phenomena. And that's why I feel, because one is the subject of neurology, the other is the subject of psychiatry to some extent, and psychology. And there is room for both. There always will be room for both, even though we're trying to bring the two together.
2 weeks ago, one German poet asked me, Vasilisa, you're a neuroscientist, so tell me please, the spirit and the mind, are they the same? What would you answer on this?
So my answer is, I do not know what the spirit is. It's a religious sort of term, and it is supposed to be immaterial, I think, because it survives death and maybe transmutes, and in different religions it travels differently after death.
Yes.
Yeah, because in Hindu religion it kind of enters another body perhaps and then goes into further cycle of life and death. In some other, or it may, in Buddhism, it becomes one with the cosmos, or when it reaches nirvana. And so there are so many traditions as to what happens to the spirit. But it's a concept, it's a religious concept which does not have a material equivalent or a scientific equivalent. The scientific equivalent, I think, is the mind, the human mind, other than the spirit. And that's why I somehow try to avoid any discussion on the spirit with someone religious and all, because I don't think it is on the same wavelength in terms of our conversation or debate.
And talking about mind, Perminder, which obviously sits in what we call the beautiful organ we have, the brain. And looking at your profile, your portfolio, you have a very special interest in this aging, the healthy aging, and also in the prevention and diagnosis of dementia. So tell us what brought you into this interest. I mean, before I ask you that, also congratulate you for winning the Ryman Prize for your contribution in healthy aging, and obviously prevention and diagnosis of dementia. So tell us, what has brought you into studying this? And then,
so I suppose you have to look at the journey one takes in a certain profession, and there are detours. So I was interested initially in psychosis, and in fact, some of my earlier work was in movement disorders.
Yep.
And then with psychosis, we started looking at late onset psychosis. So psychosis that develops for the first time later in life, and that's uncommon, but it's very interesting. And that led us to look at older people. And we started studying older people. And we started a study of dementia, because we found, in fact, late onset psychosis, many of these people went on to have dementia. Often it was vascular dementia rather than Alzheimer type dementia. So we started looking at vascular dementia. And from then we said, if you wanted to study dementia, we had to look at aging, because aging is the most important risk factor. for dementia, by far. And you have to understand aging. And also to study dementia, if you want to look at risk factors and predictors of dementia, you have to look at healthy populations as they age to see who develops dementia and who doesn't. And that's where we started our longitudinal studies of aging. So we started a memory and aging study in the early 2000s, where we recruited healthy people between the ages of 70 and 90 from the community and followed them over 15 years. Then we also studied a twin study of older people, older Australian twin study. And then we did a study of very old people, say 95 plus, who are exceptionally so long-lived, the Sydney Centenarian study. So that's really led to the foundation of this risk factors, protective factors, early diagnosis. And we are also interested in early detection. So we looked at biomarkers of various kinds of dementias. And then we've gone on to bring many of these studies together internationally, not only to look at global epidemiology of cognitive decline and dementia, but also to look at regional and ethnic differences